Well, I'm glad you're back for a second conversation about Adoniram Judson and the beginning of the modern mission movement. Some of you asked for clarification about our earlier conversation. Blood sports, what we mean by blood sports is a competition goes on till somebody dies. That's it. It's bull baiting or bear baiting. Either 10 dogs are going to be killed or the bull's going to die. You got me? Somebody's going to die. Or bear baiting, it's the same kind of formula. And you realize bull baiting and bear baiting spun off to become then dog fighting. And dogs fight until somebody dies. And that is also expressed in cockfighting. You got me? That's what we mean by blood sports of 200 years ago. So into that environment, Judson is born. The theological and church environment over here, maybe we ought to review that 200 years ago. We have 13 colonies that have now become 13 states. Tell me, when was Adoniram Judson born? 1788. When did we vote the Constitution of the United States of America? 1788. George Washington becomes president in 1789. You got me? The second president of the United States is John Adams. John Adams and Adoniram Judson live within 2 blocks of one another. We don't know if they ever knew each other or if the families ever communicated, but that's the environment. The United States is just getting started. Now, what's happening in the church world? The church world, all of these 13 colonies, now 13 states, have a state-approved religion. And in Boston, it's Congregationalist. And the Congregationalists will remain the state-approved religion until 1833. Now, there was a Baptist guy down in Virginia who challenged James Madison. His name was John Leland. John Leland challenges James Madison and says, we're not going to vote for this new Constitution unless you put some amendments in there that deal with things we're interested in. And the First Amendment of the Constitution reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's a good Baptist phrase. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Yet we've got 13 colonies, and nearly all of them, I want to say 9 or 10 of them, have an approved, sanctioned religion, which means the others are unapproved and unsanctioned. Congress shall make, this is the First Amendment to the Constitution, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor, second phrase, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You got me? So in Boston, now this is where Adoniram Judson grows up, in Boston you had to get a license to preach. You had to get a license to be a plumber. You got me? You got to have a license to open a business. You had to have a license to preach. And so the state approved if you can preach or not. A license to preach? Now I know 200 years later that sounds awfully odd. The state approves who can preach and who cannot? There's a fellow back in England by the name of John Bunyan. John Bunyan was a Baptist, and they threw him in jail for 13 years for the heinous crime of preaching without a license. He did not have a license to preach, a license given by the state. Well, while he was in jail, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress just to make sure he had something to do. So that's kind of the environment. There are Congregationalists, mainly though Anglican, in those 13 colonies. I believe 2 of them were Congregationalists. Certainly none of them were Baptists. A guy by the name of Roger Williams had gone to Rhode Island and started a colony where religion was free. You can believe what you wish without persecution by the state. So that's kind of the theological, that's the ecclesiastical environment in which we begin the 19th century, 1800, 1812. Ready to keep going? Yes. My second thought, my second phrase, after setting the background, would be to talk about the birth of the modern mission movement, the birth of the modern mission movement. And let's call that probably 1809 to about 1812. And I know that's a short 4 years, but it will encompass some very significant things which will help us understand where we went from there. When I talk about the modern mission movement, someone will ask, well, what was the pre-modern mission movement? We often say, well, that's the book of Acts. The book of Acts is the first mission movement of the Christian gospel. But then the modern mission movement will begin about 1812, 1814 in through there. So that's where the phrase modern comes from. But realize there were missionaries before 1812, and I understand that, and I'm trying to make, to be honest and make sure that you guys understand that. Yes, the Catholics had missionaries. The Catholics had missionaries, and one of the neat things here at the Judson is a rubbing down in the lower level of this building of the Nestorians who went to China in 1800 as missionaries, and we have evidence of that here even in this building that we're in now. St. Patrick, Ireland, missionary. I grew up in New Mexico, and they sent missionaries, and they established all the missions up and down the Rio Grande. And my history book in the 8th grade of New Mexico history would begin with this sentence: Santa Fe, New Mexico was a thriving city, while Jamestown, Virginia was yet but a howling wilderness. They had colonized and tried to missionize the Southwest before the British ever got to it over on the East Coast. And yes, there were home missions going on. I understand that. The Massachusetts Missionary Society, David Brainerd, people like that, but they were dealing with Native Americans and immigrants, not dealing with a world mission. And so we begin the modern mission movement acknowledging, yes, there's other missionaries at work, but we have to start it formally somewhere. So we'll start it with Adoniram Judson and 1812, 13, and 14. Now, Judson, remember, had the crisis of his roommate Jacob Imes. He went to seminary and then professed his faith formally in Jesus. And then he begins his studies at the seminary. At the seminary, there are several forces at work. One of those forces is called the Brethren from Williams College. Williams College in Massachusetts had a group of students that were caught in a rainstorm, and they huddled under a haystack. And under that haystack, these 5 students committed themselves to doing missions. Again, there's no books on missions. There's no classes on how you do mission. But these 5 students had made this commitment. We'll be missionaries. The haystack prayer meeting of Williams College. Several of those students came to the seminary. Judson meets them. Williams College, haystack prayer meeting. They call themselves the Brethren. They kind of have a fraternity, the Brethren. He's required to read a sermon by Claudius Buchanan, A Star in the East. And Buchanan is writing about, naturally, he's starting with the Christmas story, but he talks about the gospel in India. He has to read another book by Michael Imes. Michael Imes had been sent by the British to Burma. So that's his first exposure to Burma. but he has to read some of the works of William Carey. Those are the forces that's working at him at this point. Now, William Carey is a missionary in India, having been sent there by the Baptist of Britain. So William Carey is here in the Calcutta area, having been sent there by the Baptist from Britain, and Judson is reading some of his works over here in Boston. Okay? Those are the forces that bring him to this decision. And he scribes in his journal a decision about becoming a missionary. He's picked it up from the Haystack Brethren. He's picked it up from reading these other, he's picked it up from professors. And he scribes this in his journal. Beth, read to us, please, this significant entry in his journal, which would begin the modern mission movement.
It was during a solitary walk in the woods behind the college, while meditating and praying on the subject, and feeling half inclined to give it up, that the command of Christ, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature," was presented to my mind with such clearness and power that I came to a full decision, and though great difficulties appeared in my way, resolved to obey the command at all events.
And thus we have the calling codified now of the first missionary from America. I'm willing to do that. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations. And he decides to take that seriously. Thank you very much. So, we call this little section here the birth of the modern mission movement. So we've got him up to 1810. 1810 is when he makes that commitment. He's 22 years old in 1810, and he's ready to do something. He gets his buddies, 4 of them, go to a brethren meeting, a Congregationalist meeting. He and 4 of his buddies go to a Congregationalist meeting and ask the leadership to organize a mission society and send them as missionaries. Well, realize this is college students. These are young bucks like you. These are not 40-year-old people that are mature and experienced and have all the wisdom of the ages. These are guys that are idealists. And so sure enough, the Congregationalists think that through and vote and say yes. And they've got a mission society, but they don't have any money. So they've got a mission society ready to send them, Congregationalists, and we're waiting on the money. Finally, in the last hours of 1811, a largesse comes in, a gift comes in, and they're ready to go. So when we get to the beginning of 1812, this is why we say the mission movement will begin 1812, 13, 14. This is significant things. Here we go. Number 1 is February the 5th, Adoniram Judson will marry Anne Hasseltine. Anne will also be called Nancy as a nickname. So when you're reading the material, sometimes she's called Nancy, but her real name is Anne. Anne Hasseltine, a brilliant lassie from Bradford, Massachusetts. Now, Joel, I'm going to ask you to read here the letter that Judson sent Anne Hasseltine's father, saying, I want to marry your daughter. Will you consent to giving her to this kind of life? Now, guys, I expect you to be sure and contact your future father-in-law and go talk to him asking permission to marry his daughter. You got me? You got me? All right. Okay. In true colonial style, he writes this letter to her father. What's he asking?
I have now to ask whether you can consent to part with your daughter early next spring to see her no more in this world, whether you can consent to her departure and her subjection to the hardship and suffering of missionary life, whether you can consent to her exposure to the dangers of the ocean, to the fatal influence of the climate of India, to every kind of want and distress, to degradation, insult, persecution, and perhaps a violent death.
Wow. If you got that about your daughter, would you consent to let your daughter go into that kind of world? Well, Mr. Hasseltine, of all things, said, well, I'll leave it to Anne. He did not make the decision. He said, I'll leave it to Anne. So Anne said, yes, I'll marry this guy. I will go off into the threatening world out there we know nothing about. So, here we go. February 5th, they are married. February 6th, they are ordained. And so I have over here an etching of the first ordination of foreign missionaries from America. Are you ready? February the 6th, this is taking place in the Tabernacle. It's called the Tabernacle Church in Salem, Massachusetts. And you can see 5 guys right here being ordained. Do you see them? And in that ritual, there's the laying on of the hands. And so there's 5 ministers here laying hands on these people. Now, we talk about 8 original missionaries. It's these 5 plus 3 wives. So we'll talk about those 8. Now remember, they also come from this Williams group, from Williams College and the Williams Haystack community and a few others that have joined this group of the Brethren. Adoniram Judson, this is the first etching, first picture we have of what Adoniram Judson might have looked like. And Samuel Newell and Samuel Knott and Gordon Hall and Luther Rice. Those are the 5 gentlemen. Now, this etching is done by the Boston Globe, the best we can discover. The Boston Globe sent a reporter there, but also a photographer. You realize that in 1812 they had very few digital cameras. So this is the way the picture is made. It's done by an artist who sits there and etches this and sketches it out and that kind of stuff. And the report says over 1,500 people attended this, the first ordination of people to be foreign missionaries in the United States of America. Whenever these 5 guys knelt for their laying on of the hands, an interesting thing happened. Ann Judson, Ann Hasseltine Judson, who got married yesterday, February the 5th, this is February the 6th, came down the aisle and knelt at the end of that bench, in essence, asking for ordination. Now, this will be an indicator of Ann Judson's personality. This was an aggressive, not shy lassie. Are you with me? And when you do your research and study things closely, where are these 5 ministers looking? Where are their eyes cast? So as this reporter is sketching this out, they've got their hands on the appropriate missionary's head, but they're looking at Ann Judson. Where are these people looking? Now this is a reporter etching this out, drawing what's happening. Well, they're looking over here at Ann Judson. And there are accolades never too big to express the importance of Ann Judson in the ministry of Adoniram Judson. But he gets credit because he was a guy. But let's understand the reality of it. Ann Judson was significant. February 5th, marriage. Are you with me? February 6th is ordination. Are you with me? Okay, they try to get on a ship, but they can't leave till February the 19th. So the first launching of the first ship, February the 19th, they take off. Now, 4 of them are on that ship, the Caravan. 4 of them go to Philadelphia and get on another ship, the Harmony, and leave from Philadelphia. Why did they go on 2 different ships? These are freighters, guys. Remember, there's not a Carnival cruise line in 1812. And so these are freighters, and they take people only if they have enough room left over from the tobacco they're selling or the cotton they're selling or the hemp they're loading. You got me? And so they had room for 4, they had room for 4. And it's 1812. A war started in 1812. And what's the name of that war? Very good. And so Boston Harbor and New York Harbor are blockaded. Salem, Massachusetts, you can find this ship going to India. Philadelphia, you can find this ship going to India. And the odds of getting to India are 50%. Why are we on 2 ships? Thank you, Luke. That's right. They assumed half of them would never make it. So they take off, the first foreign missionaries from America, led by Adoniram Judson, and realize he's got buddies and people working with him. They take off to India, funded by the Congregationalists, to do missions, to work with William Carey. Now, it's 4 months. It's 4 months from Boston to Calcutta. And I know you're on your honeymoon. You got married 2 weeks ago, and you're on your honeymoon, but Judson spends significant time reading the Bible because he knows he's going to have to face this Baptist guy, William Carey. He's going to have to face this Baptist guy, William Carey, here in India, and he better be pretty serious about those action words in the last part of Matthew. Now, Bethany read part of that. Go, make disciples, baptize, and teach, those action words. And this one, the baptismo line, confused him. Because baptismo means dip, dunk, immerse. And Judson says, I've never been dipped. I've never been dunked. I've never been immersed. I've seen the Baptists do it, but nobody wants to be a Baptist. They dip and dunk and they immerse. And he was baptized as a child. His parents chose for him to be baptized. He didn't choose. His parents chose for him. And so he was sprinkled as a child. And on this honeymoon trip, 4 months, he's wrestling with those action words, the main one being baptismo. Well, when he gets to India, he goes to William Carey, and out of intellectual honesty, he asks, will you please immerse me, baptize me? I want to be baptized the way the Bible says it. William Carey says no, but then assigns it to one of his assistants, and so William Ward immerses Adoniram Judson and Ann Judson on September 8, 1812. They are baptized. Now, what does that mean? It means he's unemployed. Now, who's he working for? The Congregationalist Board of Foreign Missions. But now he has embraced a new theology, and he's Baptist. Well, of all things, about 2 weeks later, the second ship arrived in Calcutta. They assumed the second ship didn't make it. But the second ship arrived in Calcutta. And on the second ship is this fellow Luther Rice. And Luther Rice has to come to the leader of his team, and he has to say, Adoniram, I've been reading the Bible on the way over here, and I feel like I need to be immersed. And Adoniram says, well, you know what? I feel that same way. I was just immersed September the 8th. Now they had no tweeting in 1812. They didn't have good email.